Hey guys, welcome back to Sleep into Power. I'm NJ, and as always, it means the world to me that you're here. Whether you're a long-time subscriber who has fallen asleep to these documentaries more times than you can count, or whether this is your very first night with us, thank you. This channel exists because of you. Because of the comments, the topic suggestions, the quiet community of night owls and deep thinkers who gather here when the rest of the world has gone silent. Before we begin, a few small things. Sleep into Power is now available on Spotify, so if you prefer to listen with your screen off, or drift away with your headphones on and your phone face down, you can find every documentary there. And if you'd like to take these ideas beyond the videos, the Sleep into Power book is available on Amazon, in both paperback and Kindle. It's the philosophy of this channel in written form, and I'm genuinely proud of it. Tonight's documentary was requested more than almost any topic we've ever covered. So many of you asked for this one. In the comments, in messages, in ways big and small. You know who you are. This one is for you. And wherever you are right now, whatever time it is where you're listening, whether it's just past midnight in London, the early hours in New York, late evening in Sydney, or somewhere quiet in between, I want you to know that you're welcome here. Get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day loosen its grip on you. There is nowhere you need to be for the next few hours, except exactly where you are. So, let's begin. There is a question that has quietly followed humanity through every century, every culture, every gathering of people who have ever stood together in a room. It is a question most of us have asked ourselves at some point, usually late at night. Usually after an evening where we watched it happen and couldn't quite explain it. Why are some people simply magnetic? Not the loudest people, not the most beautiful, not even, in many cases, the most accomplished. There are people who walk into a room and say almost nothing, and yet somehow, by the end of the evening, everyone remembers them. Everyone wants to know what they were thinking. Everyone felt, in some small way, drawn towards them, the way water finds its way downhill without ever appearing to try. Have you ever noticed this? Perhaps you've met one of these people. Perhaps you sat across from them at a dinner, or worked alongside them, or spoke to them for 10 minutes at a party years ago, and strangely, you can still picture their face. They didn't perform, they didn't dominate. If anything, they seemed to hold something back. And yet the pull was unmistakable. I'll tell you when I first became fascinated by this. Years ago, when I was a young drummer playing the clubs on the Sunset Strip, I used to watch the rooms as much as I watched my kit. Night after night, the same pattern. The loudest people, the ones working hardest to be seen, burning through the crowd like flares, bright and then forgotten. And then, occasionally, someone else. Someone standing near the back, unhurried, saying little, and the whole room slowly tilting towards them like plants towards a window. Nobody could explain it. The bouncers noticed it, the bartenders noticed it, the other musicians noticed it. We just didn't have the words. It took me 20 years and a lot of reading to find out that science had been quietly gathering those words all along. For a long time, though, most of us had only vague ones: charisma, presence, magnetism. Words that describe the effect without explaining it. The way our ancestors described lightning as the anger of the gods because they had no concept of electricity. But over the past century, something remarkable has happened. Psychology, neuroscience, and the careful study of human behavior have slowly begun to take this mystery apart, piece by piece. And what they have found is stranger and more beautiful than the myth. Because it turns out that the pull certain people exert is not magic, and it is not manipulation, though it can be imitated by manipulators. And we will talk about that too, honestly and without flinching. The pull is something else. It is the visible surface of a set of deep, ancient processes running quietly in the human nervous system. Processes that evolved over millions of years to answer one question above all others. Is this person safe? That question sits underneath almost everything we will explore tonight. Long before our species had language, long before we had cities or philosophy, or names for our feelings, we had each other, and each other was both our greatest resource and our greatest danger. A calm ally could mean survival. A volatile stranger could mean death. And so evolution built into us an exquisitely sensitive instrument for reading other human beings, an instrument that operates below conscious awareness, faster than thought, and never switches off. When you meet someone new, that instrument goes to work within moments. It reads the steadiness of their voice, the pace of their movements, the way their eyes settle on you or don't, whether their outer behavior seems to match some inner state, or whether something feels performed, mismatched, slightly wrong in a way you couldn't articulate if your life depended on it. You experience the output of all this computation not as data but as feeling, a sense of ease, a flicker of caution, an inexplicable warmth, a quiet urge to lean in or to step back. The people we call magnetic are, in a very real sense, people whose presence answers that ancient question well. Something about them tells our nervous system, before our conscious mind has formed a single opinion, that here is a person who is steady, regulated, unhurried, at home in themselves. And because that signal is rare, because most of us move through the world carrying visible static, visible urgency, visible need, the person who carries none of it stands out the way a still pool stands out in a rushing river. Tonight, over the next few hours, we are going to walk slowly through this hidden territory together. We will look at why calm people are trusted before they have earned it, and what is actually happening in the body when one person's stillness settles an entire room. We will explore why the mind cannot stop returning to conversations that ended too soon, why silence can feel louder than speech, why being deeply listened to is one of the most powerful experiences a human being can have, and why it has become so vanishingly rare. We will visit the psychology of attachment, the science of first impressions, the strange economics of attention and scarcity, and the quiet architecture of what we might call presence. And we will be honest about the shadow side. Every one of these psychological forces can be used well or used badly. The same principles that make a good therapist feel like sanctuary can make a con artist feel like destiny. We will look directly at that darkness, not to teach it, but to understand it, because understanding how influence works is the best protection anyone can have against those who would use it against them, and the best guide for anyone who wants to carry their own presence with integrity. Because here is the deeper truth we will keep returning to, the one the manipulation manuals never mention. The techniques can be faked, but the faking always costs more than it earns. The people who are magnetic for a lifetime rather than an evening are not running tactics. They have simply become, slowly and often through difficulty, the kind of person the tactics try to imitate. Genuinely calm rather than performing calm. Genuinely curious rather than strategically attentive. Genuinely at peace with not being everything to everyone. That kind of person cannot be manufactured in a weekend, but they can be understood, and understanding, as you'll see tonight, changes things. So let your breathing slow a little. You don't need to remember any of this. That's the quiet luxury of these documentaries. There will be no test, no notes, no need to hold on. The ideas will settle where they settle, like leaves finding the ground. And whatever your mind keeps, it will keep without effort. Let's start where the body starts, with calm itself and the strange, contagious power of a settled nervous system. Picture a hospital at 3 in the morning. Somewhere down a corridor, a monitor is alarming, and a junior doctor, 2 years out of medical school, is standing over a patient whose condition is deteriorating faster than her training ever prepared her for. Her heart is pounding. Her thoughts are scattering. And then the door opens, and a senior consultant walks in. He does not rush. He does not raise his voice. He asks 2 quiet questions, looks at the monitor, and says, in a tone you might use to comment on the weather, "Right, Let's sort this out. And something extraordinary happens, not just to the patient, but to everyone in the room. The junior doctor's hands steady. The nurse's movements become smoother. The panic that was spreading through the room like smoke simply stops spreading. Nothing about the medical situation has changed yet. What changed was the emotional weather. One regulated nervous system walked into a room full of dysregulated ones, and the room reorganized itself around him. Psychologists and physiologists have a name for the underlying process. They call it co-regulation, and it may be one of the oldest social technologies our species possesses. Human nervous systems are not sealed units. They are porous, constantly reading and responding to the states of the nervous systems around them. An anxious person in a room raises the baseline tension of everyone in it, usually without a single word being spoken. A genuinely calm person lowers it. We are, in a sense, always breathing each other's inner states. This begins at the very start of life. A newborn cannot regulate its own distress. It has no technique, no perspective, no inner resources at all. What it has is a caregiver, and when that caregiver holds it, speaks softly, breathes slowly, the infant's storming little system gradually entrains to the calmer one beside it. The heartbeat settles, the cortisol falls. The child is not taught calm. It is loaned calm, thousands of times, until eventually it internalizes the loan and learns to generate the state itself. We never fully outgrow this arrangement. Adults co-regulate too, constantly, invisibly. It is why a steady friend can make a crisis feel survivable without offering a single solution. It is why the tone of a captain's voice over an intercom matters more than the words. And it is why the calm person in any group acquires a strange, unofficial authority that no one voted on and everyone obeys. Have you ever noticed that in a genuinely tense meeting, when everything is going wrong, people's eyes drift towards the least rattled person in the room? Not the most senior, the least rattled. There is a deep evolutionary logic to this. For most of human history, danger was immediate and physical, and the individual who stayed composed while others panicked was, statistically, the individual most worth following. Panic is expensive. It narrows attention, degrades judgment, and spreads. Composure signals spare capacity, a mind not yet at its limit. When we defer to calm people, we are running software that is far older than language. Now the voice. Of all the channels through which calm travels, the human voice may be the most powerful, because the voice is a direct broadcast from the body's inner state. When we are anxious, the muscles of the throat tighten, the breath shortens, and speech becomes faster, higher, more clipped. Listeners register this instantly and involuntarily. They may not consciously think, this person is anxious. They simply feel a faint unease of their own beginning to rise, because their nervous system has caught the transmission. Slow, low, unhurried speech does the opposite. It signals, at a level far below argument, that the speaker's body is not braced for threat. And here is the subtle part. Because listeners' systems entrain to what they hear, a slow speaker does not merely appear calm. He makes the people listening to him measurably calmer. His pace becomes the room's pace. His pauses give everyone else permission to stop sprinting. This is one reason the most commanding voices you have ever heard, in a cockpit recording, in a great lecture, at a hospital bedside, were almost certainly quiet ones. There is a myth worth dismantling here, because the internet is full of advice telling people to speak slowly, as a dominance tactic, to weaponize the pause, to perform gravitas. And it is true that, briefly, performance can work, because listeners' first read is of the surface. But human beings are startlingly good lie detectors when it comes to emotional state, even when they are poor lie detectors for facts. A performed calm has micro-leaks. The pace is slow, but the breath is high in the chest. The words are measured, but the eyes are checking for effect. Over time, and usually not much time, people sense the mismatch. And mismatch is the one thing our threat detection systems are specifically built to notice. The person becomes not magnetic, but uncanny. Real vocal calm cannot be installed from the outside in. It grows from the inside out, from a body that has actually learned to remain settled under pressure, through experience, through practice, sometimes through the long work of healing old fear. The voice then follows the body honestly, and honesty is precisely what makes it land. Which brings us to composure under provocation, perhaps the most visible form of calm, and the one people find most quietly impressive. Every social world contains provocation. The cutting remark in the meeting, the relative who knows exactly where your buttons are, the stranger online whose entire purpose seems to be extracting a reaction. And every provocation is, underneath, a kind of question. It asks, can your inner state be operated from the outside? Can I reach in and pull a lever and make you dance? Most people answer yes without meaning to. The flushed face, the raised voice, the frantic self-defense. All of it confirms that the lever works. And something subtle is lost in that moment. Not because anger is shameful, but because the person has demonstrated that their equilibrium is public property, available to anyone willing to poke at it. The person who receives the same provocation and remains genuinely settled, not suppressing rage behind a mask, but actually unhooked, answers the question differently. No, the lever does not work. My inner state is not on the table. And observers register this answer with an almost physical respect, because everyone, at some level, knows how difficult it is. We have all lain awake replaying the moment we lost our composure and wishing we could take it back. Watching someone keep theirs is like watching someone lift a weight we have personally failed to lift. But notice what genuine composure is not. It is not coldness, and it is not the suppression of feeling. Suppression is expensive. The feeling doesn't vanish, it goes underground, into the jaw, the shoulders, the 3 in the morning replay. And other people can usually sense suppressed emotion humming behind a controlled face, which reads not as strength but as strain. True composure is closer to what the Stoics meant 2,000 years ago, when they distinguished between the first movement of emotion, the involuntary jolt that no human being can prevent, and everything that comes after, which is where choice lives. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire from a military tent on the Danube, wrote notes to himself about exactly this, about receiving insult and difficulty without handing over the inner citadel. He was not pretending to be unbothered. He was practicing, nightly, the art of being genuinely harder to disturb. That practice is available to anyone, and it is worth naming what it actually looks like, because it is humbler than the mythology suggests. It looks like noticing the jolt of anger and waiting 3 seconds before speaking. It looks like breathing out slowly, once, before answering the email. It looks like asking yourself, in the heat of a moment, will this matter in a week? Tiny, unglamorous acts, repeated for years, that gradually retrain a nervous system to hold its center. And here is the gentle irony that will follow us all night. The people who do this work are not usually doing it to become magnetic. They are doing it because reactivity was costing them too much. In relationships, in health, in peace. The magnetism arrives as a side effect. Calm that is cultivated for its own sake reads as depth. Calm that is cultivated to impress reads, eventually, as technique. Other people can tell the difference, not consciously, but in the felt sense they carry away from you. And the felt sense is what they remember. So the first hidden mechanism of the drawn towards feeling is this. We are pulled towards regulated nervous systems because our own systems settle in their presence. And settling feels like safety, and safety, to a social animal, feels like home. But how exactly does one person's inner state cross the space between two bodies? By what road does calm, or panic, or warmth actually travel from your nervous system into mine? The answer was discovered almost by accident, in a laboratory in northern Italy, by scientists who were studying something else entirely, and it begins with a monkey, a summer afternoon, and an ice cream cone. Parma, Italy, in the early 1990s. In a neurophysiology laboratory at the university, a team led by Giacomo Rizzolatti is mapping the brains of macaque monkeys, recording the activity of individual neurons in a region that plans and executes movement. The work is painstaking and, on the surface, unglamorous. A monkey reaches for a peanut, and a particular neuron fires. The monkey grips a raisin, and another neuron fires. Cell by cell, action by action, the researchers are charting the machinery of movement. And then something happens that is not supposed to happen. As the story is told, during a pause in the experiment, one of the researchers reaches for food himself, in full view of a monkey that is sitting completely still, wired to the recording equipment, doing nothing at all. And the monkey's motor neurons fire. The same cells that fire when the monkey grasps food are firing while the monkey merely watches someone else grasp it. The animal is motionless, and yet, deep in its brain, it is in some measurable sense performing the action it observes. The team called these cells mirror neurons, and their discovery opened one of the most discussed, most debated frontiers in modern neuroscience. Caution is required here, and honest science requires us to state it. The grandest claims made about mirror neurons in the years that followed, that they explain empathy, language, civilization itself, ran far ahead of the evidence, and researchers have spent 2 decades walking the more breathless headlines back. What can be said with reasonable confidence is more modest and still remarkable. Brains, including human brains, appear to understand the actions and states of others, partly by simulating them, by running a muted internal echo of what they observe. Watching, at the level of the nervous system, is not passive. It is a quiet form of doing, and whatever the final verdict on the cellular details, the behavioral reality this points to has been documented beyond dispute, and you have felt it your entire life. Human beings are natural mirrors. We echo each other constantly, automatically, and almost entirely without awareness. Watch 2 people deep in easy conversation, in a cafe, on a park bench, and observe them the way a naturalist would. Within minutes, their postures have begun to rhyme. One leans forward, and shortly after, so does the other. One crosses their legs, and the position migrates across the table. Their speech rhythms converge, their pausing patterns align, their gestures begin trading shapes. Neither has decided any of this. The synchrony simply assembles itself, the way 2 pendulum clocks mounted on the same wall gradually fall into step, and psychologists who film such interactions and analyze them frame by frame find this convergence everywhere that rapport exists. In a well-known series of studies at the close of the 1990s, the psychologists Tanya Chartrand and John Bargh gave this everyday phenomenon a name, the chameleon effect, and demonstrated its 2-way power. People unconsciously mimicked the mannerisms of strangers they interacted with, the foot shaking, the face touching, without any idea they were doing it. And when the researchers reversed the arrangement, instructing a confederate to subtly mirror some participants and not others, the mirrored participants came away liking the confederate more and rating the interaction as smoother, again with no awareness of why. The mimicry itself, invisible to everyone involved, was manufacturing warmth. Why should the body's echo produce the heart's welcome? The logic runs deep. Synchrony is information. 2 organisms moving in time are, in a rudimentary but real sense, sharing a state. And shared states are how social animals coordinate, bond, and recognize their own. Long before language, alignment of rhythm and posture may have been among our ancestors' most reliable signals of alliance. To this day, when someone falls into step with us, some ancient auditor concludes, "This one is with me," and files the feeling under trust before the conscious mind has noticed anything at all. Emotional states travel by the same contagion. Researchers who study what they call emotional contagion have shown that feelings pass between people through channels almost too fast to see. the automatic split-second imitation of facial expressions, postures, and vocal tones, each imitation feeding back into the imitator's own nervous system and generating a trace of the original feeling. Sit with an anxious person, and your face, without permission, begins performing micro-versions of their tension, and the performance itself makes you tense. Sit with someone genuinely at ease, and the same machinery works in your favor. This, at last, is the road we were looking for at the end of the last movement, the road by which calm crosses the space between bodies. It is carried by mirrors. The consultant's steadiness in that 3 a.m. ward did not persuade anyone. It was reproduced in them, face by face, breath by breath, beneath every threshold of awareness. Here we should pause on a distinction the mirror system quietly enforces, because it separates the genuine article from every imitation. Deliberate mirroring is a staple of sales trainings and influence seminars. Match their posture, pace their speech, echo their words, and in the shallow end it can work, for the reasons we have just seen. But the machinery that detects synchrony is the same machinery that detects false synchrony, and it is very old and very good. Mimicry that runs even slightly out of time, that copies too precisely or too promptly, that mirrors the gesture but not the feeling underneath it, tends to register not as rapport but as wrongness, the interpersonal equivalent of the uncanny valley. True synchrony is not produced by watching the other person's body and copying it. It is produced by actually attending to them, so completely that your body aligns on its own, as a byproduct of shared attention, which means the technique, once again, is downstream of the state. You cannot convincingly fake the echo. You can only genuinely listen and let the echo happen. There is one more gift hidden in the mirror, and it may be the most practical insight of this entire movement. If inner states are contagious, then every person is, whether they intend it or not, an emotional broadcaster. And the question is only what they are broadcasting. The perpetually rushed transmit rush. The quietly resentful transmit static. And the settled transmit settlement, everywhere they go, to everyone they meet, for free. This is why certain people seem to improve a room simply by being in it, why their arrival changes the weather even before they speak, and why others, without ever doing anything identifiably wrong, exhaust everyone around them. We are all, always, weather. The only choice we have is what kind. Perhaps you can think of the broadcasters in your own life, the ones whose presence tightens your shoulders, and the ones whose presence lowers them. And perhaps more gently you might wonder which you have been lately, in your home, in your work, in the small rooms of your days. Not as a judgment, there is no judgment here at this hour, but as a quiet noticing. The signal we transmit is not fixed. It is simply the current state of the instrument, and instruments can be tuned. So the space between people, which looks empty, is in fact dense with traffic, echoes crossing in both directions, states reproducing themselves in other bodies, the boundary between self and other far more porous than it feels. And it is across this crowded, invisible air that the mind must perform its next task, the one every new encounter demands. Within moments of meeting a stranger, before a word has been weighed, it must answer the oldest questions. Who is this? Friend or threat? Capable or not? The verdict arrives with astonishing speed, from astonishingly little, and it changes everything that follows. How that verdict is reached, and how strangers watching a few silent seconds of film can predict what a semester of students will conclude, is where we walk next. In the early 1990s at Harvard, a psychologist named Nalini Ambady ran an experiment that should not have worked. Together with her colleague Robert Rosenthal, she took video recordings of university teachers in their classrooms and cut them down to almost nothing. Silent clips, stripped of every word, lasting mere seconds. Then she showed these fragments to strangers, people who had never met the teachers, never sat in their classes, never heard them speak a single sentence. and ask the strangers to rate them. How confident does this person seem? How warm? How competent? By any reasonable logic, these ratings should have been noise. What can you possibly know about a teacher from a few silent seconds of them moving around a room? And yet, when Ambady and Rosenthal compared the strangers' snap judgments with the evaluations given by actual students at the end of an entire semester, the two sets of ratings lined up to a degree that startled the researchers themselves. Strangers watching seconds of silent footage were arriving at broadly the same verdicts as students who had spent months in the room. Even when the clips were trimmed shorter still, the effect held. The judgments formed almost instantly, and then months of additional evidence barely moved them. Ambady called these fragments thin slices, and the phrase entered psychology permanently, because the finding turned out to be general. Across dozens of studies, human beings extract remarkably stable impressions from remarkably thin slivers of behavior. A walk, a greeting, a posture, a tone, and those impressions go on to shape everything that follows. Sit with how strange that is. We like to believe we assess people the way a court assesses a case, gathering evidence, weighing it, arriving at a considered verdict. The research suggests something closer to the reverse. The verdict arrives first, in seconds, delivered by fast, ancient machinery, and then the slow, rational mind spends the following weeks acting less like a judge and more like a lawyer, selectively gathering whatever evidence supports the verdict already reached. Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for mapping this kind of mental division of labor, described the mind as running two systems. One is fast, automatic, effortless, and always on. The system that recognizes a face as angry before you have consciously seen the face. The other is slow, deliberate, and effortful, the system you use for long division and careful arguments. Kahneman's uncomfortable discovery, elaborated across decades of research, was that the fast system does far more of the driving than we admit, and that the slow system frequently just writes up a justification for wherever the fast system has already steered. First impressions live entirely in the fast system, which raises the obvious question: what is that system actually measuring in those first few seconds? Researchers who study social perception have converged on a striking answer. Two dimensions dominate, and they dominate everywhere, across cultures, across contexts. The first is warmth. Is this person friend or foe? Do their intentions towards me seem good? The second is competence. Can they act on those intentions? Are they capable? Nearly everything we feel about a new person is some blend of these two readings, and warmth is read first, because in evolutionary terms, another person's intentions mattered before their abilities did. A capable enemy is worse than an incapable one. This ordering explains something you may have noticed in your own life. Impressive people who lead with their competence, their credentials, their sharpness, often leave others cold, or worse, faintly threatened. Competence without warmth reads to the fast system as a potential hazard, whereas the person who leads with warmth, with genuine interest and goodwill, and lets their competence emerge gradually and almost reluctantly, tends to be embraced. The warmth opens the door. The competence, discovered later, feels like a gift rather than a weapon. There is a reason we are more charmed by brilliance that hides itself than by brilliance that announces itself. Now add the ingredient that turns an impression into trust, because trust is a different thing, slower, more precious, and built from different material. If first impressions are made from thin slices, trust is made from thick ones, from patterns observed over time. And the pattern the trust machinery cares about most is consistency. Think about the people you actually trust. Not the most talented people you know, not the most charming, the ones you would call at 2 in the morning. What do they have in common? Almost certainly this. They are the same person on Tuesday that they were on Saturday. The same person to your face that they are behind your back. The same person under pressure that they are at ease. Their behavior is predictable, not in the sense of being boring, but in the sense of being reliable. You know what you will get. Prediction is the nervous system's whole business. The brain is often described by neuroscientists as a prediction engine, constantly forecasting what will happen next and registering sharp signals whenever reality deviates from the forecast. A consistent person is a person the engine can model. Around them, the mind spends less energy on vigilance and more on everything else, which is experienced, simply, as relaxation. An inconsistent person, however delightful at their best, keeps the engine guessing, and guessing is expensive. This is why volatile charm exhausts people in the end, and why steady, unspectacular reliability quietly wins across years. The mind is drawn to fireworks, but it builds its house next to lighthouses. Consistency has a second, subtler power, which is that it makes small gestures legible. When a reliable person pays you a compliment, the compliment carries information, because it emerges from a pattern and stands out against it. When a person who flatters everyone pays you the same compliment, it carries almost nothing. The value of any signal depends on the noise around it. People who are consistent are, in effect, low-noise transmitters. Everything they do means more, because everything they do is measured against a stable background. And here we should pause on the shadow, because the machinery of first impressions has a well-documented dark side, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Confidence tricksters are named for exactly this vulnerability. The con artist's entire craft is the manufacture of a thin slice, a warm, assured, consistent-seeming surface, presented long enough to trigger the trust verdict, and then cashed in before the thick slice can be gathered. History's great swindlers were rarely brilliant liars in the factual sense. They were brilliant performers of warmth and steadiness. They understood, intuitively, that the fast system delivers its verdict early and defends it stubbornly, and that once a person has decided you are trustworthy, they will explain away a remarkable amount of contrary evidence rather than reopen the case. Which is why the deepest protection against manipulation is not cynicism, but simply time. The performed version of every virtue is a sprint. It can be maintained for an evening, a courtship, a sales cycle. It cannot be maintained for years, across contexts, under fatigue, in the unguarded moments. Thick slices do not lie. If you take one practical thing from this part of the night, let it be that gentle rule. Extend warmth quickly, extend trust slowly, and let consistency, not charisma, be the thing you are actually watching for. There is a last, quieter implication here, and it points back at ourselves. If others form their verdict of us in seconds, from tone and posture and pace, then the verdict is being formed from precisely the things we cannot fake in the moment, and can only change over the long term. The thin slice is thin, but it is a genuine sample of what we have practiced being. A person who has spent years becoming calmer, kinder, more settled, walks into every room with that history legible in their body and receives its dividend before they say a word. In that sense, first impressions are not really made in seconds at all. They are made across decades and merely delivered in seconds. The verdict, then, arrives early and runs deep. But a verdict is a conclusion, and the mind, curiously, is not most captivated by conclusions. It is most captivated by the things it cannot conclude. Which brings us to one of the strangest findings in the psychology of memory, a discovery that began, of all places, with a waiter in a Berlin cafe. Berlin, in the middle of the 1920s. The cafes are loud with argument, philosophy, cigarette smoke, and the particular electricity of a city between catastrophes. At one table sits a group of psychologists from the university, students of the great Kurt Lewin, and they have noticed something odd about their waiter. He takes their long, complicated order without writing anything down. Drinks, dishes, substitutions, who is having what. And when the food arrives, he places every item perfectly, from memory. An impressive performance. But a little while later, after the bill is paid, One of them calls him back with a question about the order, and the waiter looks at them blankly. The information is gone, not partially faded. Gone. The moment the transaction closed, his mind had apparently deleted the file. Among the students who found this fascinating was a young Lithuanian psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik, and she did what good scientists do with a curious anecdote. She dragged it into the laboratory. In a series of experiments published in 1927, she gave people batches of simple tasks, puzzles, small constructions, clay figures, and quietly interrupted them partway through some of the tasks while allowing them to finish others. Later, she asked them to recall what they had worked on. The results were unambiguous and have carried her name ever since. People remembered the interrupted tasks far better than the completed ones, roughly twice as well in her original studies. Completion, it seemed, was a kind of permission to forget. Interruption kept the memory alive, humming, refusing to be filed away. Lewin's explanation, which Zygarnik developed, was that beginning a task creates a kind of psychological tension, a system under load, and that tension is only discharged by completion. Interrupt the task, and the tension persists, holding the material in an active, restless state. Later researchers found the effect could be fickle, stronger in some conditions than others, and modern psychology treats it with appropriate nuance. But the core observation has never stopped ringing true, because every human being has lived it. The mind lets go of what is finished. It circles what is not. Have you ever noticed which conversations you replay at night? Rarely the ones that ended cleanly, with everything said. It is the interrupted ones. The discussion cut off before you could make your point. The message left unread. The person who said, "I'll tell you the rest next time," and never did. Unfinished things do not politely wait in memory. They knock. Storytellers discovered this centuries before psychology named it. The cliffhanger is the Zygarnik effect industrialized. A Victorian novelist ending his serialized chapter with the heroine's hand on the doorknob. A television writer cutting to black at the precise moment of revelation. Both are deliberately installing an open loop in a million minds at once, knowing those minds will now do the marketing for them, returning again and again to the unresolved tension like a tongue to a loose tooth. And what is true of stories is true, more quietly, of people. Consider what happens when you meet someone who explains themselves completely. Within an hour you have their history, their opinions, their wounds, their plans. Everything is offered, nothing is implied. However pleasant the encounter, notice what your mind does afterwards. Very little. The file is complete, so the file is closed. The waiter clears the table. Now consider the person who was warm, engaged, clearly substantial, and yet somehow, when the evening ended, you realized you had learned almost nothing about them, while they had learned a great deal about you. Or the person who mentioned, in passing, that they had once spent a year somewhere unexpected, and then let the conversation move on without elaborating. These people leave open loops, and the mind treats an open loop about a person exactly as it treats one about a story. It returns, it wonders, it fills the silence with hypotheses. Days later, unbidden, they surface in your thoughts, not because they demanded space there, but because unfinished business is the one tenant memory never evicts. Underneath this lies some of the most interesting machinery in the brain, the machinery of prediction and reward. For a long time, the popular story was that dopamine is the chemical of pleasure, released when good things happen. The research that reshaped this view, much of it flowing from studies of how the brain learns from rewards, found something more precise. The dopamine system responds most powerfully, not to reward itself, but to the gap between expectation and outcome, what scientists call prediction error. A reward that is fully expected barely registers. A reward that is uncertain, possible, but not guaranteed, sets the system alight, and it is most active in the anticipation, in the not yet knowing, in the lean of the question mark. This is why anticipation so often outshines arrival, why the night before the holiday can glow brighter in memory than the holiday itself, and why uncertainty, in careful doses, is not the enemy of fascination but its fuel. The brain is an anticipation engine, and it pays its richest attention to whatever it cannot yet predict. People who fascinate us sit exactly in that zone, not the chaotic, who are all noise and no pattern, and whom the prediction engine eventually writes off as static, and not the utterly transparent, whom the engine models completely, and then, having no further questions, quietly stops attending to. The fascinating sit in between, largely consistent, readable in their values and their steadiness, and yet containing rooms the model has not mapped, depths that reveal themselves occasionally and without warning, the quiet colleague who turns out to speak 3 languages, the gentle grandmother whose wartime past emerges once, in a single sentence, and is never mentioned again. Here, though, honesty requires us to open the darker door, because this is the mechanism that manipulation exploits most ruthlessly. If uncertain reward captures attention, then attention can be captured deliberately by manufacturing uncertainty, warmth given and withdrawn on an unpredictable schedule, messages answered instantly one day and ignored for 3, affection as a lottery. Psychologists studying learning discovered long ago that rewards delivered on unpredictable, intermittent schedules produce the most persistent, most compulsive behavior of all, far more than rewards delivered reliably. It is the architecture of the slot machine, and when a human being applies it to another human being, the result is not love, but something that can feel bewilderingly like it, an anxious, consuming preoccupation that the sufferer often describes as never having felt so alive. Let us be clear-eyed about this, because clarity is protection. That pattern, the running hot and cold, the strategic silence, the engineered doubt about where you stand, is not mystery. It is a technique, it is learnable, and it works on almost anyone, which is precisely why decent people refuse to use it. What it produces is not attraction to a person, but addiction to a pattern, and it corrodes both parties, the target through anxiety, and the operator through the slow discovery that they are now performing a role they can never safely stop performing. Attention won this way must be defended this way, forever. It is a house built on a debt that compounds. Genuine mystery is different in kind, not just in degree, and the difference is worth stating plainly. The manipulator manufactures gaps that contain nothing. The genuinely intriguing person simply has more interior than they display. Their reserve is not a tactic aimed at you. It is a natural property of a life actually being lived, full of pursuits, thoughts, and histories that do not all need an audience. You sense the unmapped rooms are real rooms, with real furniture, and crucially, their consistency of character remains total, even while their depths stay private. You never doubt where you stand with them. You simply know there is more to them than where you stand. That combination, total reliability of heart, incomplete disclosure of contents, may be the exact recipe the attention system finds irresistible, because it offers the engine what it loves most, a safe base and an open question at the same time. So the unfinished captivates, the uncertain enthralls, and the mind keeps returning to the rooms it has not seen. But there is a force that works in the opposite direction, and is, in the end, even stronger. Not the fascination of being unknown, but the almost gravitational pull of being deeply, accurately known. Because the rarest experience you can give another human being is not intrigue. It is the feeling of being truly heard. And that is where we go next. In the middle of the 20th century, in consulting rooms in Ohio and later Chicago, a soft-spoken psychologist named Carl Rogers was quietly committing heresy. The therapeutic orthodoxy of his era cast the therapist as an expert and the patient as a puzzle. The doctor interpreted, diagnosed, advised, directed, Rogers, watching what actually seemed to help the people across from him, became convinced the profession had it backwards. What healed people, he came to believe, was not clever interpretation at all. It was something so simple, it was almost embarrassing to write down. People began to change when they felt, perhaps for the first time in their lives, fully received, listened to without judgment, without agenda, without the listener waiting to speak, understood accurately, and accepted anyway. Rogers built his entire approach, which he called person-centered therapy, around creating those conditions. Genuine empathy, honest presence, and what he famously termed unconditional positive regard, a warmth towards the person that did not fluctuate with their confessions. And his radical claim, made decades before neuroscience could weigh in, was that human beings possess a natural momentum towards growth that mostly needs the right relational climate, the way a seed needs soil rather than instruction. Give a person the experience of being deeply heard, he argued, and they will often do the rest themselves. Whatever one makes of the therapeutic debates that followed, on one point Rogers has been vindicated beyond argument. Across decades of research into what makes therapy work, one of the most reliable findings is that the quality of the relationship, the feeling of being understood by the person opposite you, predicts outcomes at least as strongly as the particular school of technique being used. The listening, it turns out, was never the warm-up to the real treatment. In large part, the listening was the treatment. Now step out of the consulting room and ask an uncomfortable question about ordinary life. When was the last time anyone listened to you like that? Not waited for you to finish, not glanced at their phone and said, not listened for the pause where they could insert their own story, their own advice, their own cleverness, but actually followed you, with their whole attention, into what you were trying to say, including the parts you were struggling to say, and reflected back not just your words but your meaning, so that you had the startling experience of hearing your own thoughts return to you clearer than you sent them out. For most people, the honest answer is measured in years, and that scarcity is the key to everything in this movement. We live in what may be the most communication-saturated era in human history, and simultaneously in a famine of attention. Everyone is transmitting, almost no one is receiving. The average conversation is two monologues taking turns, each speaker using the other's airtime to rehearse, which means the person who can genuinely listen now holds something close to a superpower, not because listening is complicated, but because it has become vanishingly rare, and the value of anything is set by its scarcity. Watch what actually happens to someone who is being truly listened to. Their pace slows. Their sentences, which began as the polished, pre-packaged versions of themselves that we all keep by the door, gradually give way to rougher, truer material. They say things they did not plan to say, and sometimes things they did not know they thought. You can almost see a kind of internal unclenching, because some ancient sentry inside them, the one that constantly monitors whether it is safe to be real, has surveyed the situation and, for once, stood down. And notice what they feel towards the listener afterwards. It is not merely gratitude, it is something closer to attachment. People do not bond most deeply with those who impress them. They bond with those around whom they were able to be most fully themselves. The impressive person is a performance we watch. The listening person is a room we can finally exhale in. And human beings do not fall in love with performances, not for long. They fall in love with rooms. Picture a crowded wedding reception, somewhere in the English countryside. Years from now or years ago, it doesn't matter. At one table sits an elderly man, a retired schoolteacher perhaps, unremarkable in every visible way. And yet all evening, one guest after another finds their way to the empty chair beside him and stays far longer than they meant to. He asks small questions. He waits through pauses that anyone else would have filled. He remembers, from an exchange an hour earlier, the name of someone's daughter. By midnight, half the room has sat in that chair, and every one of them leaves it feeling curiously restored. And if you asked them the next morning who the most charming person at the wedding was, they would name him, this man who told no stories, made no jokes, and claimed no attention at all. He simply received people, one after another, like a harbor receiving boats. Some version of this man exists at the edge of almost every gathering you have ever attended. He is worth studying more than any celebrity alive. There is a beautiful asymmetry hidden in this, and it is worth turning over slowly. In any gathering, the majority are competing to be interesting, fighting for airtime, polishing anecdotes, angling for the moment of admiration. A much smaller number have discovered the quieter path, which is to be interested. And the interested reliably eclipse the interesting, for a reason that is almost mathematical. The interesting person makes others think, "What a remarkable person." The interested person makes others think, "What a remarkable conversation." And then, curiously, I really liked them, though if pressed, they could not tell you a single thing the person said about themselves. What they remember is not information. It is how they felt in the room, and the feeling was of mattering. The mechanics of this kind of listening are almost insultingly simple, which is perhaps why so few practice them. It asks questions, and then asks follow-up questions, following the thread of the other person, rather than redirecting to the thread of oneself. It tolerates pauses instead of pouncing on them, because pauses are where people find the truer second sentence. It notices feeling underneath content, hearing that a story about a difficult boss is really a story about not being valued, and it remembers. Weeks later, it asks how the mother's operation went, how the exam turned out. Nothing announces "I truly saw you" like accurate memory of the small details of someone's life. We are moved by it out of all proportion to its difficulty, because it proves that when we were speaking, we were not simply being waited out, we were being kept. Here, as everywhere tonight, the shadow must be named. Attention this powerful can be counterfeited, and the counterfeit has a long and ugly history. Every skilled con artist is a magnificent listener. So is every cult recruiter. The technique even has an informal name among those who study coercive groups: love bombing, the sudden flood of attention, understanding, and apparent acceptance directed at a lonely person, calibrated to feel exactly like the thing they have been starving for. The mechanism is identical to Roger's consulting room, which is precisely what makes it so effective and so wicked. The difference is the destination. Genuine listening is attention offered as a gift, with the other person's flourishing as its end. Predatory listening is attention deployed as an extraction tool, gathering the map of someone's loneliness and longings in order to use it. The experience from the inside can feel identical for months. The tell, once again, is time, and what the listener does with what they learn. Information received in intimacy and later used as leverage is the signature of the predator, and it is worth teaching the young people in your life to recognize it. But let us not end this movement in the shadow, because the light here is the point. Of everything we will discuss tonight, listening is the most democratic. Calm takes years to build. Presence is elusive, but attention, full, patient, undivided attention, is available to anyone, tonight, tomorrow, at no cost, except the surrender of our own airtime. And its effects are absurdly disproportionate. You can change the texture of someone's entire week by giving them 20 minutes in which they do not have to compete to be heard. There are people in your life right now, and perhaps you can picture one of them as you lie there, who are quietly starving for exactly this, and who would remember, for years, the evening you simply put everything down and then asked again, and then said nothing at all, in the most generous way possible. The feeling of being heard, though, is really the adult form of something older. It is the echo of the first relationship any of us ever had, the one that taught our nervous system, before we had words, what other people are for and whether they can be trusted. To understand why being received matters so much, and why some people find closeness easy while others find it terrifying, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a psychologist watching children at a door, waiting to see what happens when their mother returns. London, in the years after the Second World War. The city is still pocked with bomb sites, and in its hospitals and clinics, a psychiatrist named John Bowlby is becoming preoccupied with a question his profession considers already answered. Why do children love their mothers? The reigning theories of the day were bloodlessly practical. The child attaches to the caregiver, they said, because the caregiver provides food. Love was cupboard love, affection as a byproduct of feeding. Bowlby did not believe it. He had spent the war years, and after studying children separated from their families, evacuees, orphans, the young patients of residential institutions, and what he saw in those children, the despair, the detachment, the lifelong shadows cast by early separation, could not be explained by interrupted meals. Something far deeper had been torn. Drawing on the new science of ethology, the study of animal behavior, Bowlby proposed something that scandalized his colleagues and eventually reorganized psychology. The bond between infant and caregiver, he argued, is not a byproduct of anything. It is a primary biological system in its own right, as fundamental as hunger, sculpted by evolution for one purpose: keeping the vulnerable young close to a protector. The infant is born already equipped to form this bond, and the bond has a specific architecture. The caregiver serves as what Bowlby's collaborator Mary Ainsworth would later call a secure base, a fixed point of safety from which the child ventures out to explore the world, and to which the child retreats when the world becomes too much. Watch any toddler in a park and you can see the system running in real time. The child toddles away from the mother towards something fascinating: a dog, a puddle, another child. Then, at some invisible boundary, turns and looks back, checking. Is she still there? Is she watching? Reassured, the child pushes further. Startled by something, the child returns, refuels on closeness for a minute, and sets out again. Exploration and attachment, courage and comfort, are not opposites in this design. They are partners. The security of the base is precisely what funds the adventure. Ainsworth's research, observing mothers and infants first in Uganda and then in a famous laboratory procedure in Baltimore, added the crucial discovery. The system does not develop identically in everyone. Where care is warm, responsive, and reliable, children develop what she called secure attachment, an embodied expectation that closeness is safe and help will come. Where care is cold, intrusive, or frighteningly unpredictable, children adapt in the ways available to small creatures with no exit, some by muting their needs and keeping others at a distance, some by amplifying their distress and clinging, monitoring, never quite believing the connection will hold. And here is the finding that gives attachment theory its enormous reach. These early adaptations do not stay in childhood. They persist as what Bowlby called internal working models, deep, wordless templates of what to expect from closeness, and they travel with us into every adult room we ever enter. The colleague who cannot ask for help, the friend who vanishes whenever things get emotionally serious, the lover who reads catastrophe into a delayed reply, the steady soul who assumes goodwill, weathers conflict without unraveling, and somehow makes everyone around them a little braver. These are not personality quirks floating free. Very often, they are the visible surface of models built in rooms we cannot remember, which returns us, by a path you may already sense, to the central mystery of tonight. Because when we ask what certain rare people radiate, the people others are inexplicably drawn towards, one increasingly persuasive answer is this: they function as secure bases for other adults. Think about who people actually seek out when life truly frightens them. Not the wittiest person they know, not the most successful. There is usually one particular person, and the qualities that person has are strangely consistent across everyone's answer. They are reachable. They do not panic when you bring them something heavy. and they do not punish you for bringing it. They do not immediately seize the problem and make it about their solution, or their anxiety, or their opinion of your choices. They can hear the worst thing without flinching away, and without loving you less, and being with them somehow returns you to yourself. Around such a person, the ancient system that once checked over a small shoulder in a park settles into the same conclusion it reached then. The base is holding. I can go back out. Notice that everything we have gathered so far tonight now clicks into place around this idea, like iron filings around a magnet. The regulated nervous system of our second movement is the felt texture of a secure base. The consistency that builds trust is its reliability. The deep listening of Roger's consulting room is its responsiveness. What looked like separate mechanisms are better understood as facets of a single signal, endlessly checked for by every human being who was ever a child, which is all of us. Will you remain steady if I am not? Can I be fully myself here and still be safe? The people who broadcast a credible yes to those questions are rare, and their rarity is not mysterious. A credible yes usually has to be earned, either through the good fortune of a secure beginning, or, just as often, through long, deliberate work in adulthood, because one of the most hopeful findings in this entire field is that working models can be revised. Psychologists call it earned security. Through reflection, through therapy, through the patient experience of one trustworthy relationship, sometimes simply through years of honest effort, people who began life with every reason to fear closeness can become secure themselves, and then become the base that others build on. The template is deep, but it is written in pencil, not stone. Nothing about your beginning is a verdict on your end. And perhaps, as you lie there with your eyes growing heavier, it is worth letting that settle for a moment, without effort, the way a stone settles through still water. Whatever room you learned closeness in, you are not confined to it. People rebuild this, quietly, all the time. The shadow here is brief, but must be spoken. Because attachment needs are so deep, they are the most tempting of all levers for those who would control others. The manipulator's oldest strategy is to make themselves the target's only base, lavishing safety at first, then slowly cutting away every other source of it. Friends, family, confidence, until the person clings to the very hand that unsteadies them, the way a frightened child clings even to a frightening parent, because a frightening base still feels safer than no base at all. If you remember one warning sign from tonight, let it be this one. Love that isolates is not love. A true secure base wants you to have many bases. It funds your exploration. It is glad when you are strong elsewhere. But the true version, the person who simply is safe to be near, asks for none of this vigilance. And being around them, you can feel your breathing change, the way it is perhaps changing now, slower, lower, the day loosening another notch. Emotional safety is not dramatic. It does not spike or dazzle. It is more like warmth from a wall that held the sun all afternoon and gives it back gently through the evening. And human beings, who are drawn to fireworks for an evening, are drawn to warmth for a lifetime. There remains, though, a puzzle. If safety and openness bind people to us, why are the most magnetic people so often also the most private? Why does the person who never quite explains themselves haunt the imagination? Safety opens the door, but it seems to be depth, half-glimpsed and unhurried, that keeps the mind returning to the doorway. The relationship between what we show and what we keep, the mask and the interior, was the lifelong obsession of a Swiss psychiatrist who built a tower with his own hands on the shore of a lake, partly so that he would have somewhere no one else could go. His name was Carl Jung, and he is waiting for us in the next room. On the upper shore of Lake Zurich, at a place called Bollingen, there stands a stone tower that a psychiatrist began building in 1923 and kept adding to for most of his life. He laid much of the stone himself. For long stretches he lived there without electricity, drawing his water from the well, cutting his wood, working by lamplight. He carved inscriptions into the walls. And crucially, he did not treat it as a retreat center or a salon. It was, by design, a place where almost nobody else went. Carl Jung, one of the most famous minds of his century, a man whose correspondence and consulting diary were full beyond measure, deliberately maintained a room the world could not enter. He would have said this was not eccentricity but hygiene. Jung's psychology rested on a distinction that has since passed into common speech, though usually with its depth sanded off. He observed that every person develops what he called a persona, borrowing the Latin word for the mask worn by actors in the ancient theater. The persona is the face we compose for the world, the packaging of ourselves for social consumption, the professional manner, the agreeable smile, the curated account of what we did at the weekend. And Jung was careful to say that the persona is not a lie, it is a necessary instrument. Civilization would be unbearable if everyone broadcast their raw interior at all times. The mask lets strangers cooperate. The danger, he argued, arrives when a person becomes their persona, when the performance runs so continuously that the performer forgets there was ever anyone backstage. Jung regarded this as one of the characteristic ailments of modern life, and he thought its symptoms were everywhere: a brittleness, a hollowness, an anxious dependence on the audience's reaction, because when the mask is all there is, applause becomes oxygen. His tower was the countermeasure, a standing appointment with the person behind the mask. Somewhere the actor could stop acting, and remember, in silence and stone, that he existed independently of being seen. Hold that image, because it illuminates something we have all noticed and rarely examined. There is a particular quality possessed by people who have an inner life they do not fully publish. You can feel it in their company. Their words seem to come from further back, as though each sentence had crossed a certain distance before being spoken and had been considered on the way. They react to events, but the reaction seems to pass through somewhere private first. Even in a crowded room, some portion of them is elsewhere. Not rudely, not absently, but in the way a tree in a courtyard is also, through its roots, somewhere beneath the courtyard. We say such people have depth, and we mean it almost literally. Their behavior has a third dimension. It extends inward. Contrast this with the fully published person, and let us be gentle here, because the modern world practically demands full publication. Every thought posted, every feeling announced, every meal, every grievance, every triumph offered to the feed within the hour. Nothing held back, nothing left to ripen in private. Whatever else this way of living costs, notice what it does to presence. When everything is on the surface is all there is to encounter. The person can be scrolled, and the attention of others, which is drawn by the unmapped and the withheld, finds nothing to wonder about, because wondering has been made unnecessary. To be endlessly available for viewing is, in the end, to be easy to finish looking at. The mathematics of meaning are at work here, the same law we met when we spoke of compliments. A signal's value rises with its scarcity. The person who shares selectively transforms sharing into an event. When someone who rarely discusses their past sits back one evening and tells you, quietly, about the year everything fell apart for them, the telling lands with enormous weight, not because the story is more dramatic than anyone else's, but because you understand you have been handed something that is not handed out. You have been distinguished. Disclosure, rationed, becomes a form of intimacy in itself. Disclosure, unrationed, becomes wallpaper. Psychologists who study relationships describe healthy closeness as developing through exactly this kind of graduated exchange. Two people take turns lowering the drawbridge one plank at a time, each disclosure slightly deeper than the last, each one met with care rather than punishment, trust ratcheting upward in small, reciprocal steps. It is a dance with a natural tempo. Reveal too little for too long, and the dance starves. but reveal everything at once, and something equally fatal happens. The other person is handed the entire map on day one, and the shared expedition, which is what closeness actually is cancelled for lack of territory. The gradual unveiling is not an obstacle to intimacy. It is the very medium intimacy travels through. People bond in the discovering, not in the download. Now, the necessary honesty. There is a counterfeit of depth, and the modern advice industry sells it openly. Be mysterious, it says. Withhold strategically. Never let them know how you feel. Answer slowly on purpose. Manufacture an enigma, and watch them lean in. And as with every counterfeit we have examined tonight, the trouble is that it works briefly and then inverts. Performed mystery is a persona of privacy, a mask painted to look like a door. The strategist is not protecting an inner life. They are staging the appearance of one, while anxiously monitoring the audience to see whether the staging is working, which is the precise opposite of an inner life. And people sense the difference over time, the way you sense a false wall in an old house. The genuinely deep person's reserve is oriented away from you, towards their own interior. The performer's reserve is oriented entirely towards you. A fishing line dressed as solitude. One is a tower, the other is a stage set of a tower, and stage sets have nothing behind them. The real thing cannot be faked, because the real thing is not behavior at all. It is the private life itself, actually lived. Time genuinely spent beyond the audience's sight, in study, in craft, in prayer or reflection, in difficulty privately endured, in joys never posted. Jung at Bollingen was not curating an air of mystery. He was maintaining a self, and the unmistakable gravity people felt in his presence was simply that self, showing through. This is the open secret of every truly compelling person you have ever met. Their depth was never a technique. It was a residence. They actually live somewhere inside themselves, and when you speak with them, you can hear the interior of the house in their voice, the way you can hear the size of a room in an echo. And perhaps there is a quiet invitation in this, one you might let drift through your mind as sleep begins its slow approach. In an age that pays us, in the currency of attention, to publish ourselves completely, the keeping of an interior has become almost a discipline, an hour that reports to no one, a notebook no one will read, a walk taken without documentation, a thought allowed to remain unshared, not because it is shameful, but because it is yours, and because a self, like a garden, needs some ground that is never trampled by viewing. The people who keep such ground do not merely seem deeper, they are deeper, in the only sense that matters, and the depth attends them everywhere, audible beneath their ordinary sentences, like water under a boat. But depth alone does not explain the last piece of the room-entering mystery. There are deep, private, gentle souls whom nobody notices at all. Something else marks out those who are felt the moment they arrive, some economy of signal and stillness, of certainty carried lightly, of the body speaking before the mouth does. The ancients called it authority. We might call it quiet charisma. It has rules, they are researchable, and they are almost the exact opposite of what the loud have always assumed. That is where we walk next, softly, as the night deepens around us. Let everything soften now. There is nothing more to learn tonight, and nothing to hold on to. Whatever your mind wishes to keep from these hours, it has already kept, filed away somewhere below the surface, where the important things are stored without effort. All that remains is to drift back, slowly, over the country we have crossed, the way a traveler on a night train watches the day's landscape return in fragments, softened by distance and darkness, asking nothing. Somewhere back there is the consultant walking calmly into the 3 a.m. ward, and the room reorganizing itself around his steadiness. One settled nervous system, quietly lending its settlement to everyone near it, the oldest kindness there is. Perhaps you have been that steadiness for someone. Someday you barely remember, Perhaps someone was once that steadiness for you. The loan is still in you somewhere, still earning its gentle interest. Somewhere back there, strangers are watching a few silent seconds of a teacher, and knowing, and the verdicts of years are arriving in moments, formed not from what anyone said, but from what they had spent their lives becoming. Decades, delivered in a glance. Your own decades travel with you too, legible in your walk, your voice, your way of pausing, an autobiography the body publishes whether or not you ever write a word. And somewhere back there, in a loud Berlin cafe 100 years ago, a waiter has just forgotten a completed order, and a young psychologist is noticing. And from that small noticing comes everything we learned about the unfinished, how the mind releases what is resolved and circles what is not, how the interrupted conversation knocks at midnight, how the half-glimpsed depth of a quiet person goes on unfolding in memory, long after the transparent have been filed away and forgotten. The consulting room is back there too, with its patient, heretical listener, discovering that people heal not from being advised, but from being received. If a face has been drifting through your thoughts tonight, someone in your life who is quietly starving to be heard, you might find them again in the morning, or some morning soon, and put everything down, and ask, and then ask again, and then say nothing at all, in the most generous way you know. It costs 20 minutes, it is remembered for years. The toddler is still in the park, back there, turning at the invisible boundary to check that the base is holding, and the base is holding, and so the child pushes further out into the bright world. Courage was never the opposite of comfort, it was funded by it, all along. And whatever base you were given or not given at your own beginning, the template was written in pencil. People rebuild this, quietly, patiently, at every age, people rebuild this. The stone tower still stands by its lake in the dark, holding the one room the world was never shown, and the old man who built it is long gone. But the lesson keeps its light on. Keep some ground that is only yours. An hour that reports to no one, a thought allowed to remain unshared. A self, like a garden, needs earth that is never walked on, and the depth that others feel in you will be exactly as real as the ground you have kept. And the emperor is still in his tent on the cold river frontier, lamp burning low, writing to no one, the most watched man in the world practicing, one night at a time, his freedom from being watched. All the applause of Rome has gone silent, every crowd dispersed 60 generations ago, and the private notebook remains, still warm, still read tonight by someone, somewhere, perhaps not so far from you. The audience was never the point. It was never the point. So let the whole night settle into its single, simple shape, light enough to carry into sleep. The pull that certain people have was never a trick, and it was never given only to the few. It is what a human being naturally radiates once the noise dies down. Calm enough to lend, consistent enough to trust, curious enough to listen, deep enough to keep something back, free enough to need nothing from the room. Every one of those is a practice, not a prize, and every practice is open, and none of them require you to become anyone other than who you are. They only ask you, gently, to stop performing someone else. You have everything you need. You always did. The house is quiet now. The streets outside have gone still. Wherever your streets are, let your breath find its own slow rhythm. No counting, no effort. Just the tide coming in and going out on its own schedule, the way it has since before you could remember, the way it will all night without any help from you. Feel the weight of your body being held, completely held, nothing for your shoulders to do, nothing for your hands to do, nothing left anywhere that needs you tonight. If these documentaries bring something good to your nights, it would mean a great deal if you subscribed, so we can keep making them together. Sleep into Power is there for you on Spotify whenever you prefer to listen with your eyes closed and the screen dark. And if you'd like these ideas beside you in daylight too, the Sleep into Power book is waiting on Amazon, in paperback and on Kindle. Thank you for spending this night with me. Thank you for your comments, your requests, your quiet company from every corner of the world. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, you are welcome here, and you always will be. Let go now. Sleep is close, and it is kind, and it has been waiting for you patiently this whole time. Sleep into power, guys. Good night.